The star was dying, and the silence it created was louder than any scream. Within the luminous conclave, suspended in the gravity-neutral heart of a hollowed-out moon, the light of 1,000 captured nebulae swirled across walls of polished obsidian and living crystal. Here, where the fate of galactic arms had been decided for millennia, the assembled delegates of the elder races felt a cold that had nothing to do with the failing starlight pouring through the great observation arch. It was the cold of uncertainty, a primal fear that gnawed at the edges of their ancient, well-ordered minds. At the center of the circular chamber, a holographic projection shimmered, a perfect sphere of absolute blackness hanging in the void. It was so devoid of light, of energy, of information, that it seemed to tear a hole in the very fabric of the projection, a wound in reality itself. Around this void, a sun, once a brilliant G-type star, was visibly dimming, its corona sputtering, its light bleeding away into the oppressive emptiness of the sphere. High Prelate Vorlag of the Cathar, his chitinous exoskeleton shimmering with iridescent patterns of authority that had been passed down through 100 generations, gestured a multi-jointed limb toward the image. His voice, a series of resonant harmonic chimes, echoed with the weight of undisputed dominion. It is an anomaly, a stellar sickness, nothing more. The claims of this human species are the boasts of infants who have discovered a new way to make noise. They seek to elevate themselves by attaching their name to a cosmic tragedy. He spoke with the unshakable certainty of a being whose species had charted the cosmic laws before humanity's ancestors had learned to tame fire. The Cathar Empire was not an institution. It was a geological fact of the galaxy, and its truths were as solid as the superdense worlds from which they had emerged. From across the chamber, a hulking silhouette shifted. Warlord Grak of the Grok, a creature of granite-like flesh and raw, kinetic power, slammed a massive fist onto his console. The stone groaned in protest. "Sickness does not manifest as perfect geometry, Prelate," he growled, his voice a subvocal tremor that vibrated through the chamber floor. "This is a weapon, a shroud, something that bleeds a star dry. The humans call it their creation, then it is a declaration. They have forged a star killer, and its arrival is a deadly one. They have brought this silent fall upon the ethel system. We should answer this declaration with fire, not debate." His sentiment was as blunt and unsubtle as his physiology. The Grok understood one language above all others: overwhelming force. To them, any new power was a threat until it was either subjugated or annihilated. A third voice, soft and fluid like the whisper of light through a prism, cut through the tension. Lumina She, the emissary of the Silthran, floated in her containment field, her form a being of pure, cohesive energy, her thoughts rippling visibly through the air around her. "Fire is a tool of fear, Warlord Grak, and fear is born of ignorance. We are ignorant of this phenomenon, and we are profoundly ignorant of its alleged creators." Her gaze, a concept more than a physical act, was fixed on the void in the hologram. "The High Prelate speaks of them as infants. Yet what infant could conceive of such a thing? The ancient texts of my people speak of a theoretical construct, a vessel of absolute nullity. They were philosophical exercises, thought experiments on the nature of existence and non-existence. But they all concluded with the same axiom. They said no one could build it. The energy requirements, the manipulation of space-time, the sheer audacity of commanding a piece of the universe to simply stop. It was deemed an impossibility, a defiance of the fundamental constants." Vorlag shifted, the plates of his carapace grinding softly. "Philosophy is not physics, emissary. The Silthran mind finds patterns in chaos and calls it meaning. I see only a dying star and a primitive race attempting to claim credit for a galactic tide they cannot comprehend. Their history is a testament to their immaturity. They are a flash of violent, chaotic expansion. In the span of a few of our generations, they have erupted from their solitary world, their technological progress a fevered dream of uncontrolled acceleration. They fight amongst themselves with a savagery we shed eons ago, yet they produce art of sublime and terrifying beauty. They are a contradiction, a paradox wrapped in soft flesh and disposable lifespans." "A paradox we have underestimated," she countered, her light pulsing gently. "We dismissed them. We offered them no seat at this conclave. We saw their noisy chemical rockets and their crude kinetic weapons and placed them in the Galactic Codex under precohesive to be observed. We never considered they would develop in silence, that their noise was a deliberate dist. Rakshan, we have observed their wars, their politics, their frantic consumption of their own world's resources. But what have we failed to see? What has grown in the shadows of our arrogance?" The debate circled as it had for cycles. The conclave, a body designed for deliberate glacial decision-making, was paralyzed by the sheer wrongness of the situation. Their sensors, instruments that could taste the quantum foam and chart the birth of protostars, returned nothing from the sphere. No mass, no energy, no radiation, no gravity. It was not an object in the conventional sense. It was an absence, a perfect, calculated absence. The star Ethel was not being consumed in a violent spectacle of plasma flares and gravitational tearing. It was simply fading. Its energy, its light, its heat, its very presence in the universe was draining away into the sphere as if into an infinite abyss, leaving behind a growing sphere of absolute zero and absolute silence. The silent fall. The term, coined by a horrified Cathar scout, had stuck. It was an unnervingly poetic description for an event that defied every known law of thermodynamics and astrophysics. Warlord Grack's patience was wearing thin. "We have a fleet ready to jump. We can collapse the system's primary jump point and contain this thing before it grows. We can blast this human-made void with enough energy to crack a planet's core. An absence can be filled. A silence can be broken." "And if you are wrong," Xi's voice was a cool stream against his heated assertion. "If this object is not a void to be filled but a boundary, if you fire upon it and your weapons simply cease to exist, what happens to a fleet that pours its soul into a bottomless well? You speak of containment, but you risk only contagion. You do not know what rules govern this place now. The humans claim to. That alone should give us pause." High Prelate Vorlag made a gesture of finality. "The humans have been summoned. Their vessel, a single, insignificant craft, has been granted passage. They will come before the conclave, and this absurdity will be put to an end. They will confess their deception or be censured with the full weight of this council. They have been allowed to believe themselves players on a stage they do not comprehend. It is time they were reminded they are but the audience." His confidence was a performance, a projection of an authority he felt slipping away with every photon Ethel lost to the encroaching dark. In the deepest, most secret chambers of his mind, a thought he would never permit to be voiced took root. What if they did build it? What if the infants in their chaotic, untamed nursery had stumbled upon a power the adults had only ever dreamed of? The thought was heretical. It was terrifying. The hours stretched, measured by the slow, inexorable dimming of the holographic star. The delegates sat in a state of suspended animation, trapped between their disbelief and the chilling evidence. They watched the data streams, the flatlining energy readings, the spectral analyses that showed a star being methodically and cleanly erased from existence. There was no chaos, no explosion, no debris field, just a quiet, relentless descent into nothing. It was the sterile, passionless efficiency of the process that was most unnerving. It was not the rage of a weapon, but the cold, indifferent work of a machine built for a purpose they could not fathom. Then the proximity alerts chimed, a soft, respectful tone that belied the gravity of the moment. The human ship had arrived. It was, as Vorlag had said, insignificant. A small, sleek vessel, barely the size of a Cathar diplomatic shuttle devoid of any visible weaponry or ostentatious displays of power. It moved with a quiet grace, settling into its designated docking ring without fanfare. The conclave waited, a collective breath held across a dozen species. They expected a delegation in elaborate pressure suits, a flurry of activity, perhaps a show of nervous energy from a species about to face the collected might of the galaxy's elder powers. Instead, a single figure emerged. The chamber's internal atmosphere was adjusted to a median that was tolerable, if not comfortable, for all. The human did not wear a helmet or an environmental suit. She walked onto the central dais with a steady, unhurried gait, her posture calm, her expression serene. She was small, fragile by the standards of nearly every being in the room. Her face, a soft landscape of pale skin and dark hair, was unreadable, her dark eyes sweeping across the assembly of titans, gods, and ancient intellects without a flicker of fear or awe. She wore a simple, dark blue uniform, adorned only with a small silver emblem of a stylized star enclosed within a circle. She stopped at the designated point, clasped her hands gently behind her back, and waited. The silence in the chamber deepened. It was a silence of appraisal, of shock. This was the representat. Of a species that claimed to have unmade a star. This small, soft-skinned creature who stood before them with the placid demeanor of a scholar entering a library. High Prelate Vorlag was the first to break the stillness. His resonant voice filled the chamber, imbued with all the condescending authority he could muster. "You are the human representative." The woman inclined her head slightly. Her voice, when it came, was clear and even devoid of the reverberating harmonies or subvocal growls of the others. It was strangely direct, unadorned. "I am Ambassador Evelyn Reed, representing the Terran Coalition. I am here to answer your summons." "You will address this conclave with the proper honorifics, Ambassador," Vorlag chimed, a sharp note of rebuke in his tone. "You stand before the architects of galactic peace, the stewards of cosmic law." Reed's expression did not change. "I stand before a council of concerned neighbors. I will afford you the respect that designation deserves. Let us not waste time on ceremony. You are afraid. You have questions. Please ask them." The sheer audacity of her statement sent a ripple through the assembly. Warlord Grack leaned forward, his massive form casting a shadow over the dais. "We have one question, human. Did you build the weapon that is killing the Ethel Star?" Ambassador Reed turned her calm gaze to the Grok. "We built the construct in the Ethel system, yes, but you are mistaken, Warlord Grack. It is not a weapon, and the star is not being killed." This was too much for Vorlag. The plates on his back rattled with indignation. "Not being killed? We have watched it fade for 82 rotations. Our sensors, which can map the quantum signature of a thought, see a star being bled into an abyss of your making. Do you take us for fools? Do you believe your infantile lies can deceive the Cathar Empire?" "I do not believe you are fools, High Prelate," Reed replied, her tone remaining impossibly level. "I believe you are looking at a solution and seeing only the problem. You are observing an event outside your technological and philosophical paradigm and are attempting to define it with the limited lexicon of your experience. Your lexicon includes tools, weapons, and cosmic anomalies. The veil is none of those things." "The veil," Lumina Shi's voice was a gentle probe. "You have named it." "We have," Reed affirmed, turning to the shimmering Silthrin. "We call it the chronological veil, and its purpose is not to destroy. Its purpose is to preserve." A wave of incredulous murmuring swept the conclave. "Preserve? By extinguishing a sun." Grack let out a low growl of disgust. "Preserve? You have plunged a dozen worlds and countless orbital habitats in that system into a deep freeze. You have snuffed out the light that sustained them. You call this preservation." "The life in that system was evacuated," Reed stated simply. "We moved every sentient being, every complex ecosystem, every microbial sample we could catalog. The process took decades of our time. It was completed before the veil was activated." Vorlag stiffened. "You conducted an evacuation of an entire star system without notifying this conclave, without the permission of the system's sovereign government. That is an act of aggression, an invasion." "It was an act of necessity," Reed said. "And the government of that system, a precontact species on the verge of industrialization, cooperated fully once they understood the alternative. We showed them what was coming. We offered them a new home. They accepted." "What was coming?" she pressed, her light pulsing with intense curiosity. "What alternative?" Ambassador Reed took a slow breath, her gaze sweeping the chamber once more before settling on the holographic void. The Ethel Star was not dying of old age. It was unstable. A flaw in its core, a unique and terrifying combination of exotic matter decay, was going to cause it to go supernova. But not a normal supernova. Our models, the most complex cosmological simulations ever devised, predicted an event for which we have no proper name. A cascade failure of spacetime. The explosion would have been so violent, so dimensionally incongruous, that it would have torn a hole in the fabric of our reality. It would not have been a temporary wormhole. It would have been a permanent wound, a cancer in spacetime that would have spread, unraveling the laws of physics as it went. It would have been the end of this entire galactic quadrant, not in a blaze of fire, but in a wave of uncreation. The chamber fell utterly silent. The delegates stared at the human, then at the image of the black sphere. The scale of her claim was so immense, so far beyond the scope of any known threat, that it bordered on the insane. A reality-ending supernova? It sounded like the mythology of a primitive species, a story to frighten their young. Vorlag was the first to recover, his voice dripping with scorn. "You expect us to believe this, Entasi, this apocalyptic prophecy? Your species has existed as a technological entity for a few thousand years. We have been observing stellar evolution for millions. Our libraries contain the life cycles of 1 billion stars. We have never observed such a phenomenon." "That is because it has never happened before in the recorded history of this galaxy," Reed replied without a hint of defensiveness. "But the universe is older than your libraries, High Prelate. We did not invent this theory out of fear. We discovered the evidence. We extrapolated the data. We ran the simulations 1,000,000 times, and every single time they ended the same way, with the ethel system becoming the epicenter for the dissolution of cosmic law. Simulations, Grack scoffed. Computer dreams. We deal in reality, human. And the reality is that you have built a device of unimaginable power in secret and deployed it on our borders. It is a device of unimaginable power, Reed agreed, her calm unwavering. And it was built not in secret but in solitude because we knew you would not believe us. How could we come before this conclave, a young species with a history of internal conflict, and tell you that a star was about to unmake the universe? You would have dismissed us just as you are attempting to do now. So we did what was necessary. We took it upon ourselves to solve the problem. And your solution is this veil? She asked, her essence focused entirely on the human. How does it work? What is it doing to the star? Here Ambassador Reed paused. She looked at the image of the black sphere, and for the first time a flicker of something profound, something akin to awe, crossed her face. The veil is not an object that exists in space. It is a boundary that exists in time. Inside that sphere, the temporal flow has been adjusted. Time is not stopped. It has been slowed to a rate of 1/1,000,000th of the universal standard. The star is still there. The supernova is still going to happen. But it will happen over the course of the next 500 billion years of external time. The veil is containing not just the energy of the explosion, but its temporal signature. It has taken an event that would have lasted for minutes and stretched it across an epoch, diffusing its reality-altering potential into harmless, slow-moving waves of space-time distortion that the universe can absorb without tearing. The concepts were staggering. The manipulation of time on such a scale was the stuff of gods, not of mortals. Vorlag felt a tremor run through his body, a feeling his kind had not experienced in eons, the vertigo of confronting a superior intellect. They had debated the sphere's composition, its energy source, its potential as a weapon. They had been like proto-sentients examining a fusion reactor and arguing over whether it was a shiny rock or a hot one. They had failed to even conceive of the dimension in which the device operated. "You lie," Vorlag whispered, the accusation thin and brittle, his resonant voice losing its power. "It is impossible. No civilization can command that much energy. To warp spacetime so profoundly would require the output of a galactic core." "You are correct," Ambassador Reed said, and the simple affirmation was more damning than any argument. "It would if you used brute force, if you tried to fight against the universe. We didn't. The veil is not a dam holding back a river. It is a gentle channel that redirects its flow. It uses the energy of the star itself, folding it back into the temporal matrix. It is a self-sustaining paradox. The more energy the star releases, the stronger the temporal differential becomes. It is a system of perfect, elegant balance." She made a small gesture toward the holographic sphere. "That is why it is silent. That is why your sensors detect nothing. You are trying to measure a coastline, but the ocean has been turned to glass. The event is still occurring, but so slowly, so infinitely stretched that from our perspective it has functionally ceased to exist. It is falling out of our time, out of our reality. A silent fall." Lumina Shi's form pulsed with a brilliant white light. Her psionic mind, capable of grasping the most abstract of concepts, was reeling. She was not just hearing an explanation, she was feeling the truth of it, the colossal, terrifying elegance of the human solution. They hadn't built a bigger weapon or a stronger shield. They had sidestepped the problem entirely. They had not fought reality. They had rewritten its rules for a small, isolated volume of space. It was the most profound display of technological and philosophical mastery she had ever encountered. It was the work of a civilization that did not see the universe as a resource to be conquered, but as a fabric to be mended. You saved us," she breathed, the thought echoing through the chamber, felt by all. "You saved all of us, and you did it without asking for reward or recognition." "Recognition was not the goal," Reed said. "Survival was, the survival of all of us. We are all inhabitants of the same cosmic structure. Its integrity is a matter of collective concern." Warlord Grack stared at the human, his militaristic mind struggling to process this new information. He understood honor. He understood sacrifice. He had led charges against impossible odds. But this was different. To work for decades in silence, to move a civilization, to build an impossibility, all to avert a threat no one else even knew existed. It was a level of strategic foresight and quiet, resolute duty that dwarfed any military campaign in his people's glorious history. His respect for force was absolute, and he was suddenly confronted by a power far greater than any fleet of warships. It was the power of understanding. Prove it, Vorlag demanded, his voice now strained, grasping for the last vestiges of his authority. Show us the data. Show us these simulations of yours. Show us the proof that your fantasy is real. Of course, Ambassador Reed replied calmly. We have been broadcasting the complete data packet on a secure, open channel since our arrival. Your systems would have classified it as background noise due to its complexity, but it is there. I will instruct your aides on how to decrypt it. It contains everything. Our initial discovery of the stellar anomaly, the evacuation records, the full theoretical framework for chronostatic engineering, and the complete unedited logs from the construction of the veil. There are no secrets, High Prelate. We have nothing to hide. The chamber was still as technicians, spurred into frantic action, began to work on their consoles. A Cathar subordinate, its carapace a dull, functional gray, scurried to Vorlag's side, its manipulators flying across a control surface. Minutes stretched into an eternity. The delegates watched the High Prelate waiting for his verdict. His face, an unreadable mask of chitin, betrayed nothing, but the subtle, agitated twitching of his antennae spoke volumes. Finally, he looked up from his console, his multifaceted eyes wide with a dawning horror and a profound, shattering awe. He turned his gaze not to the ambassador, but to the holographic sphere. He was no longer seeing a human weapon or a cosmic anomaly. He was seeing the ghost of his own civilization's extinction. He was seeing the quiet, unassuming monument to humanity's triumph over a foe his people had not even been able to see. The data is valid, Vorlag stated, the words tasting like ash in his mouth. The chimes of his voice were flat, stripped of their harmony, of their arrogance. The stellar models are correct. The energy signatures, they match the predictions. He fell silent, the admission hanging in the air, a death knell for the old order of the galaxy, for the comfortable certainty of Cathar supremacy. They had been standing on the edge of a precipice, blind and proud, and the infants they had scorned had built a bridge beneath their feet while they slept. The revelation settled over the conclave not like a storm, but like a deep, heavy fog. The foundations of their world had been shaken. Humanity was not a chaotic, adolescent species. They were quiet guardians. They were not arrogant. They were profoundly, terrifyingly competent. Their internal squabbles, their frantic expansion, the very things the elder races had seen as signs of immaturity, were perhaps something else entirely. The frantic, desperate scramble of a species that had looked into the abyss and realized it had to grow up, immediately, without the luxury of millennia of slow, contemplative development. They had been forced into a state of accelerated evolution not by a lust for power, but by the burden of a terrible knowledge. Lumina Shi projected a feeling of deep, resonant gratitude, a wave of pure emotion that washed over the human ambassador. You have given us a gift beyond measure, Ambassador Reed, a gift of continued existence. We are in your debt. Ambassador Reed inclined her head. There is no debt. As I said, we are neighbors. One does not charge a neighbor for helping to put out a fire that threatens the whole village. Her analogy was simple, almost primitive, and yet it resonated with a truth more profound than any of the complex political treaties that bound the conclave. But she was not finished. Her calm expression hardened slightly, a subtle shift that commanded the attention of every being in the room. The air grew tense again, but it was a different kind of tension. It was not the fear of a new weapon, but the dawning apprehension of a new, and perhaps far greater, problem. I have answered your questions about the veil, she said, her voice dropping a fraction, taking on a new gravity. But my presence here is not merely to allay your fears. I came here to deliver a warning. Vorlag, humbled but his intellect still sharp, focused on her. A warning? Is there another star? There are others, Reed confirmed, and a chill deeper than the one caused by the silent fall descended upon the chamber. Many others. The ethel anomaly was not a unique natural occurrence. It was a symptom of a much larger disease. She gestured to the central console. The image of the black sphere dissolved, replaced by a detailed map of the galaxy. It was a map of breathtaking complexity, far more detailed than even the Cathar's master charts. It showed not just stars and nebulae, but the faint, almost undetectable filaments of exotic matter and the deep, underlying currents of spacetime. It was a map of the galaxy's very soul. When we discovered the flaw in the ethel star, Reed continued, we began to search for its cause. We believed it was a freak of nature. We were wrong. We traced the exotic matter contaminants back to their source. They are not random. They are distributed throughout the galaxy in a distinct, non-natural pattern. On the map, hundreds of points of light began to glow. scattered across the spiral arms like a faint, deadly rash. These are stars that exhibit the same initial decay signatures as Ethel, Reed explained. All of them are on a path to the same kind of reality-breaking supernova. Ethel was simply the first, the one with the shortest fuse. A plague, Grack rumbled, staring at the map. A stellar plague. Not a plague, Reed corrected him softly. An echo. The pattern is not biological, it is mechanical. It is the result of a network, a piece of ancient, galaxy-spanning engineering that is beginning to fail. She zoomed the map in on a region of seemingly empty space, billions of light-years from their own galactic arm. The image resolved, revealing something that drew a collective gasp from the conclave. It was a structure, or the ghost of one, a faint lattice of energy that dwarfed entire star clusters. It was impossibly old, its signature so faint it was almost indistinguishable from the cosmic microwave background. "We do not know who built it," Ambassador Reed said, her voice now filled with a profound and somber reverence. "We call them only the precursors. This network appears to have been a power grid or a transport system or something else entirely, something our science cannot yet comprehend. It drew power by creating microscopic, temporary tiers in reality, tapping into the energy of other universes. But it is decaying. And as it fails, it is leaking its exotic fuel into nearby stars, poisoning them, turning them into ticking time bombs." The truth was now laid bare in all its terrible glory. The silent fall of the Ethel star was not the main event. It was the prologue. It was the first drop of rain before a hurricane that would scour the galaxy clean. "We knew this was a problem too large for one species to solve," Reed said, her gaze meeting those of Vorlag, Grack, and she in turn. "We built the first veil alone to prove it could be done, to prove the threat was real. We now have decades, perhaps a century, before the next star reaches criticality. And then another and another after that with increasing frequency. We cannot build hundreds of veils, not by ourselves." She paused, letting the full weight of her words settle into the ancient chamber. The political squabbles, the arrogance, the ancient rivalries, all of it felt so small, so utterly insignificant in the face of this new, shared existential threat. The humans had not come to the conclave seeking power or admission. They had not come to boast of their achievement. They had come bearing the greatest burden in galactic history, and they were offering to share it. "The Terran Coalition is formally proposing the creation of a new unified body," Reed announced. "The Galactic Stewardship Initiative, a joint scientific and engineering effort combining the wisdom of the elder races with the unique perspective of humanity. Together, we can analyze the precursor network. We can find a way to repair it or to neutralize the affected stars before it is too late. Alone, we will all perish. We will all be silenced." For a long time, the only sound was the faint hum of the conclave's life support systems. High Prelate Vorlag stood motionless, his entire worldview, the bedrock of his culture for 1,000,000 years, pulverized into dust. His people were the architects, the stewards, yet they had been blind. They had policed the small crimes of pirates and smugglers while the foundations of their reality were cracking beneath them. He looked at the human, this representative of a species he had dismissed as a cosmic footnote, and he saw not an inferior but a successor, or perhaps a partner. Warlord Grack stared at the map, at the hundreds of glowing threats. This was a war unlike any he had ever imagined, a war not against an enemy fleet, but against the decay of the universe itself. It was a war that could not be won with cannons and starships, but with knowledge and cooperation. A strange, unfamiliar feel. Ing stirred within him, the desire to build rather than to break. It was Lumina she who finally spoke, her voice a beacon of clear, unwavering light in the stunned silence. "They said no one could build it," she whispered, the words resonating with the ancient prophecy of her people. "But that was a failure of imagination. Humanity did not prove our elders wrong. They proved that the impossible is merely that which has not yet been tried." She turned her full attention to Evelyn Reed, her shimmering form bowing in a gesture of profound respect that the Silthran had not offered another species in recorded history. "Your proposal is accepted, Ambassador. The Silthran will join you." Grack let out a heavy sigh, a sound like shifting continents. He nodded once, a gesture of grim finality. "The Grok do not shrink from a worthy battle. This is the greatest battle of all. We will fight it with you." All eyes turned to High Prelate Vorlag. He stood for a long moment, the iridescent patterns on his carapace shifting through 1,000 colors of indecision and shame. Then, slowly, with the weight of a dying empire behind the gesture, he lowered his head. The Cathar have been arrogant, he chimed, his voice stripped of all its former grandeur, replaced by a quiet, somber humility. We have been blind. We will be blind no longer. We will lend our knowledge, our resources, our people to this cause. We will stand with you, humanity. Ambassador Evelyn Reed gave a small, almost imperceptible nod. There was no triumph in her expression, only a quiet resolve. The first, most difficult step had been taken. She looked out through the great observation arch, past the holographic map to the real stars beyond. They seemed different now, no longer just points of light in a peaceful, endless expanse. They were a field of embers, each one a potential fire that could consume them all. The galaxy was not a safe and silent place. It was a ruin, a haunted house filled with the echoes of a long-dead civilization, and they, the living, were now its caretakers. The silent fall had been averted in one system. Now the real work began, to keep the silence from falling everywhere else. And in that vast, terrifying, and newly united purpose, the age of humanity and of all their new allies had truly begun.